I'm very pleased to welcome Rev Ermal Kirby to join us today to talk to us about the Methodist Way of Life and his experiences on the Working Party. Ermal, some of you will know as a former chair of this district, and he and I have been friends and combative conversationalists for quite a while. So this could be an interesting conversation. Ermal, it's great to see you today. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you ended up on this Working Party and why the Methodist Way of Life is so important.
Thanks, Rachel. Really great to see you. Yes, so I had not long returned from South Africa. And as it happens, as it often happens, an email pops up in your inbox saying, this is happening, would you be interested? And at that stage, I knew nothing about the background or so, anything, because I've been away for 4 years. But it placed a Methodist way of life in the context of God for All, the initiative around evangelism that was beginning, and then linked it back to our calling in 2000, the statement that the Methodist Church had adopted. And I just found that an interesting kind of linking, not least because I'd been on the original Our Calling working group. And now they were saying that as part of the exploring of the spirituality that was needed for God for All, they thought that perhaps a Methodist way of life could help in that process. And so I thought, this sounds like not your, dare I say this, not your usual dry Methodist working party. I didn't say that, delete. But that's something. But it's something that really was trying to get under the surface, as it were, and understand about how we motivate people and how we help people to see that this is something that is alive. So I was intrigued, and Roger Walton was chairing the group, and that was an added plus, someone for whom I have a great deal of respect. So it didn't take me long to sort of, yes, I'd very much like to be part of it and see what happens. So I waited for the next email to tell me what to do.
So what is it about a Methodist way of life that you think brings life to those dusty meetings and into the Methodist Church and into us individually as Methodists?
I think that one of the things we struggle with in the Methodist Church is that we are methodical. we get into systems and ways of doing things. We know how things work and how we want them to work, and we settle down. So when Our Calling was introduced in 2000, that the whole intention was that it would energize the church. It would give us a new way of looking at our activities as a church. And what happened in some places, I think, is people just simply looked at their programs and said, how can we fit these activities into the framework of Our Calling and carry on as before? So not surprisingly, kind of 18 years on, we had not seen the transforming, the invigorating of the church that we had hoped for through that initial emphasis on Our Calling. And what I saw the potential in a Methodist Way of Life, it was saying, this is not just about the church as a whole, the local congregation, the local community doing this exercise. Now, dear Methodists, the finger is pointing at you, you are on the spot. What does it mean for me to say, I exist for increasing awareness of the presence of God. I exist to serve my fellow human beings. What does that mean for me, not for them? And it was that potential to shift it away from the escape of saying, oh, the church believes this, or the church does this, saying, what about me? And it's when you get up close and personal, you've got to do something then, haven't you, really?
So it's quite a subversive process in some ways.
It is in the best sense. I mean, please note I say in the best sense, subversive. Yes, it really gets to you when you aren't looking almost, because you can I can begin it by thinking, oh, this is a nice theoretical framework. This is a nice abstract consideration. And suddenly they're asking you these questions about, and what does it mean for you? And what am I going to do about it? And if we are honest with that, it doesn't let us off the hook. And we shouldn't want to be let off the hook, I think, in that sense.
That personal thing reminds me of an old steward that I had when I first went into one church, not in this circuit, so it's safe to say it, who I walked into my first church council meeting and said, what's your vision? And he just said to me, well, you tell us what your vision is and we'll have it. And so it sounds to me as if this is trying to turn that around and allow everybody to work out what God's vision for them is and how they work out God's kingdom in their life.
And that is so important. It isn't that leaders shouldn't have a sense of what they believe God is calling us to, but that very much needs to be affirmed by and owned by people. And I love Methodism for that capacity that it has for each person being able to contribute to the shaping of that. And I get quite frustrated sometimes when people almost kind of think, I just have to sit back and wait for someone else to tell me. And every time I manage to get close enough for them to begin to share their ideas, I always come away thinking, wow, there was treasure there. There was something there worth working with. Now, of course, the danger with that, isn't it, is that each person can then think it's my exclusive right and it's my picture is a complete one. And I keep on saying to people, it's more like us each having a bit of a huge jigsaw puzzle. We need our pieces of the puzzle. Come on, get them out of your pocket, put them on the table, and let's see the picture that emerges. It doesn't emerge in isolation. You haven't got the complete picture. It's when we all put our pieces of the jigsaw on the table that this glorious new pattern begins to emerge. But getting people to dig into their pockets and get past the sticky toffee and all the rest to those bits of jigsaw is not always easy, but when it happens, it really is an amazing experience, I found.
The image I think of is I love making glass. And some of the nicest bits of glass I like making are from the rubbish bits that I've thrown away from other projects. The other projects that have the nice pristine sheets of glass are lovely, but the real challenge is taking all these shards that prick your fingers and putting them together. And all those bits that you don't think will necessarily fit together, but eventually do. It's all those odd bits. And then it takes heat and a long time.
Absolutely. And there's that discerning as well, isn't there? Saying these broken, fragmented bits that seem to make no sense at all, to get that moment when you sort of think, I can see how it begins to shape. But then that process, the seeing is the first step, isn't it? Then the heat, as you say. And
the slow cooling, the taking the stress out. I sometimes think with these processes in churches, we have this idea that if everybody comes with God's vision, it'll all be easy and it'll all fit together nicely. And actually, quite often, you and I both know that that's not the case, that it takes arguments and disagreements and all sorts of things that enable us to bring each of our vision and each of the gifts that we've been given together.
And the church, again, this is generalized, but on the whole, we are not good at that, are we? We're not good with dealing with the anger and the difference. We think that if we disagree, it's the end of the road, rather than saying it's the start of an exploration together to say what is the truth beyond that which each of us is seeing. But we get so nervous, and rightly, we don't want to kind of walk roughshod over other people's ideas and feelings. But at the same time, if there's not that honesty and that willingness to make ourselves vulnerable to others and to hold other people in their vulnerability, we won't get to the point, which comes back again to the whole ethos behind a Methodist way of life. Because though I've said there's an encouragement to shift from the church is doing this as a whole to I am doing this, it still needs to be done in fellowship. And so, yes, you can take the material, you can read the books, and you can do it yourself, and it can become an enriching part of one's personal discipline, spiritual discipline, but to do that in companionship with others, and to have a group of people with whom you feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And for that group not to become a closed group, that we kind of say, oh, we now know where we stand and everyone else is kind of outside the pale. To avoid that, it's getting that balance right, being sufficiently coherent, cohesive as a group, but not exclusive, so that people can continually be incorporated into that group and share their experiences with one another. I'm absolutely convinced that if, as a Methodist church, we can learn to trust one another, to be vulnerable with one another, we are going to become a different kind of church. But as long as we want to be safe behind our particular walls and within our particular safe spaces, we're going to suffer. I mean, did Jesus say something about being willing to give your life away, hand your life over in order that you might find it? And I think we've got to accept that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is life-giving, rather than, it's not about heading into Lent. It's difficult to find a way of putting this, but it's not all about sackcloth and ashes. It's about actually finding life rather than giving it away.
Yeah. I suppose handing over is a better thing than giving away. If you hand your life over, you'll find it comes back to you. Whereas if you kind of hold it and clutch onto it, then it shrivels. It shrivels. And finding ways of really putting that into practice, I think, is what the whole process is encouraging us to do. Little steps, we're not suddenly saying that you go from being closed and you're having your private devotions into being willing to be on the stage and telling everyone how it is. That's not for most of us. But step by step, learning that you can open up a bit more and give a bit more and receive a bit more. It really is a transforming experience, I think.
One of the things we're seeing around in the circuit is, and this was certainly true in wider society in the first lockdown, that people are actually spending more time thinking about their interior life, if you like, and the way that affects the world as well. So presumably that actually helps to feed this process. We're seeing people who are noticing things outside and going for walks in places that are around the corner that they'd never actually spent time with before, noticing things that they wouldn't normally notice. And certainly our Bible study groups have grown in depth and knowledge of each other because we've supported each other through this experience. So presumably that too adds to.
Absolutely, that openness, that is a key word, and everywhere I've been hearing that. I think I was listening to Radio 4 last week, and quite unexpectedly, people were talking about spiritual experiences and actually using those terms. People who sort of, I would never have thought of using this word, but they've suddenly become aware of additional dimensions of themselves. Now within the shape of a Methodist way of life, we actually try to make something of that rhythm. So within each section, whether it is worship or serving, or we begin with something that says, here's a commitment that is like the challenge, the signing up, if you like, which is, it's a conscious, a deliberate engaging. That on the one hand. And then there's a bit that now think about it. You've said the words. Think about what it means, and that is going inside. But we then offer what we call the breathing in, is where different people tell a story, relate an experience that connects with that commitment and that reflection that we have offered. And it's as if we're saying, here's inspiration, here's a breathing in for you. But it doesn't stop there. You can't just hold your breath. You've got to breathe out again. And that breathing out and saying, what do I now use that energy for? What do I now make a difference in my world around? And so the cycle just rolls on, which I think is quite inspired. It came from the interactions within the group. but it is something that seemed to us to be so important in creating a rhythm, a shape that people follow, and which, as you say, I think now connects with what people are finding themselves caught up in every day. So we hope that there's going to be a kind of a quick connecting there as well, at quite a deep level, as well as in kind of on the page.
And that may be something that it feels very much in society at the moment as well, that there's this sense that we're sort of in the doldrums. That we've got to this point in January that we've been in lockdown for quite a long time, or close to it, or in and out of it, and we're not quite sure where it's going. And people have been doing that breathing in, not literally, because most of us have been holding our breath at various times, but you know, there has been that sense of noticing where we are,
yes,
and who we are. But it feels to me as if there is this need and this longing for that to then come out somehow in people, and that may be part of the doldrums, is that need for it to happen. The example I always give is from my garden, because I notice you use trellises in the book, talking about this as a trellis to hold things up. Yes, yeah, my thing is the water butt in my garden, which is terrible. It's no good at all, because my water butt is I mean, it fills with water perfectly well.
Yes,
and then it gets stagnant and breeds mosquitoes.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Because I'm
useless.
It sort of needs to go somewhere.
Absolutely.
And water the plants. And my plants quite often in the middle of the summer look like they're in the middle of the Sahara. You know, they're completely dead. And yet there's a water butt full of water.
Absolutely.
This may be something to do with my lack of gardening skill than anything else, but it is that same dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Then once we've noticed where we are, actually there needs to be that outflow.
But this, Rachel, I think is just so important at this stage in the life of the church that, as you say, it can be like the doldrums, and we've taken in as much as we can. What do we do with it? And one of my fears is that we will simply say, okay, thank the Lord, we're through that now. Let's get back to where we were. When in fact, I have a hunch that this could be a time of some radical washing out of water butts, getting a through flow. And for the church, and Methodist Way of Life might be a resource in this, for the church to say together, what is it that we are now seeing as the natural outflow from what we have experienced? How can we be a source of refreshing to others? Who are the people that we have not been in touch with, who could now be coming to church because they are now more open to receive that which we are offering? And if we are more ready to adapt what we are offering to what they are needing, then that really becomes a virtuous circle, doesn't it? There's a sense of openness and hunger and opportunity. And we are saying, actually, we're not going to be content to be just stuck in our old way of doing it. We are going to find new channels of outflowing. And I keep on saying it, but I just think that it's not an exercise, but the process, the journey of a Methodist Way of Life, for those who want it to be that, can become that path into a new way of being church, totally. For those who want to kind of sort of say, oh, it's a nice way of filling in the last few months of lockdown, it can become that, sadly. I hope there's enough kind of prods and enough uncomfortable bits in it, so that people don't just sit back and feel we can read this and say we can tick that box, but rather that there's enough that will say, people say, wow, I want to think about that some more. I want to do something about that. And if they do, then I think this is the right time for that. Just think what the church could be like in a year from now if we all were fired up with a Methodist way of life.
That does sound rather wonderful, doesn't it?
Yeah.
it strikes me as well, though, that as well as thinking of new things and new ways that the life may flow out, that actually once we start thinking and reflecting on some of these areas and commitments, that it may also involve us deciding that some parts of what we've done in the past and the way we've been in the past will need to go as well. And there may need to be some letting go as well as some building new things. Is that what struck you and what struck the working group?
We were very conscious that this cannot just be add on. You know, you're doing all the old things and you tack this on. One person I spoke to expressed it so beautifully. It was a conversation with several people, and one had said, "Oh, is this another thing that we've got to do as ministers, as church, another thing to do?" And this other person sort of said, "No, we are being offered a different way of doing the things that we are doing. We're being invited to see it in a different way and to looking at it through these lenses to sort of say, actually, that bit looks a bit redundant or superfluous or not on target." So it's an invitation to see differently and to be in the way in which we kind of make choices about what is going on. And I hope the church will take that opportunity and will really be very committed, very serious about saying, yeah, it's letting go as well as finding new ways.
So I have one last question to you, which came from the very beginning of what you said, in fact, because right at the beginning you talked about it being a question to individuals of what does this mean to you and what's God doing in your life. So is this very naughty? If I were to say to Ermal Kirby, so what does this mean to you personally? Do you have a comment, an answer where it's taking you at the moment, or what do you hope people will start looking for? Even what's your hope for the church from this, as well as for you?
Rachel, this is another 50 minutes of conversation.
If it's only 50, then it's short for us, Ermal.
But that is just such an important question. I got involved because I was convinced, deeply convinced, that the people called Methodists, that God isn't finished with us. Let me put it that way as a starting point. You know, one of my favorite, perhaps my only quote from John Wesley is, "We're raised up to spread scriptural holiness over the land." And I look at the land and I think, I don't see all that much scriptural holiness flourishing around here. So that was my personal burning passion to say, can we discover what that means for today? And the golden text for me is Micah, you know, do justice, love tenderness, walk humbly with God. A church that is committed to social justice, a church that is deeply compassionate and inclusive of the whole of humanity, a church that acknowledges that that we belong to God, that we are under the hand of God. It was that longing to see that coming into being, I think, that got me going on this, and still is what I most hope will be the outcome. How soon, how long, I haven't a clue, but to be part of that journeying and to find people who say, that's a journey worth taking, that excites me and gives me a sense of, I might be supernumerary, but I'm not done yet.
Thank you so much for being so open and honest and so enthusiastic about all of this.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to really help kind of put it in context and perspective for me. So I'm very grateful.